Hey everybody, Dr. Rob Silverman here, Tuesday afternoon. Really excited to be sharing and talking about this topic. This is something that I see every day, really have everyday conversations with my patients, and I've lectured nation and worldwide on it, and I think there's a lot of confusion on the idea of food sensitivities and food sensitivities versus food allergies. So it's really a critical element that we talk about this. And it's a real player right now when you really consider the concept of COVID-19 and people's increased levels of inflammation make them more susceptible to COVID-19 and more susceptible to a bad outcome. And not only a bad outcome in COVID-19, a bad outcome in general. So if you have a food sensitivity and you're not addressing it, you are inflamed. I'll say that again. If you have a food sensitivity, you are inflamed. 20% of the worldwide population has adverse reactions to food, probably more. So 1 in 5 people, you're at dinner, somebody at that dinner is having an adverse reaction to that food. Most people don't realize it. And a lot of the problems are, we eat a compilation of foods. We don't eat just, hey, I'm going to have a piece of chicken and that's it. We're not training for a Rocky or Rambo film and we're just opening a can of tuna like Sylvester Stallone did and eating it. We're eating 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 different ingredients. So it's really hard to ascertain which one or the multiples of which ones are leading to our increased inflammation. So the first thing I want to do is food allergy versus food sensitivity. Now, for me, a food allergy is an IgE response. It is an IgE antibody response. It's fast. It's almost like anaphylactic. It's kind of like that person that's sitting near you on the airline and essentially the flight attendant is saying, please, nobody eat any peanuts. We have someone with a peanut allergy. For me, that's a food allergy because I want to set the standard. It's immediate. It's an immediate immune response. It's also an increase in mast cell production. Now, mast cell production in the world of functional medicine and functional nutrition is truly almost a lost conversation. It's starting to be reactivated. Mast cells are not going to be very positive for your overall health. When you couple that with the idea of an increased histamine is your allergic reaction. Now, an increase in histamine, so everybody knows, not trying to get too off the tracks, increased histamine is obviously allergenic. It's also damaging to what we call the tight junctions, leading you down a path of leaky gut. It's also adversely related to methylation. So this is a food allergy. Very, very important. Something like pollen, dust, or that food. This is what traditional allergists are looking to test for. They're looking for the arm to blow up. Food sensitivities are a little different. They're a different antibody response. You're getting IgM, IgA, and IgG. Now, most people are becoming more and more familiar with antibodies because of the conversation, again, with the COVID-19 and the antibody test. So IgM is something that comes out a little earlier. It's sort of early morning M, that's how we remember it. IgG is something that's ongoing. IgG is very small, but it's 75% of the antibodies. And again, antibody response is in your adaptive immune system. It's your body's response to a pathogen or a foreign pathogen. And IgA usually refers to it's an early activation. It's something you'll get in your mouth, something you'll get in mucous membranes. It's a very early responder and it has a secretory effect. So it's a delayed reaction. They're not immediate. It's not like IgE. If you have that pop up that peanut and open it up and a person's next to you, they're almost an anaphylactics. It's not that beer or pollen injection. Their response just isn't as quick, but it does create an inflammatory cascade. Tornadoes take a while, but when the tornado comes, they're very, very damaging once it gets going. And these sensitivities can happen over time, and again, coupled with several of them. Having said that, they can be very damaging. So they're typically a blood test. Now you have an option of a serum, taking the serum, or the finger spot. And I do use the finger spot in my office. We are testing what we call a food protein. Got all my notes here. Today we're talking into the phone, having a great time. As we go through this, let me give you the key takeaway. Inflammatory responses are sometimes slow, and people may have several food sensitivities Simultaneously, therefore, it is not hard to determine, it's very hard to determine which food is the culprit. So again, that enchilada, that salad, you have everything in there. You're putting chicken, you're putting different vegetables. You may put some rice. Those bowls, you may have 8, 9, 10 different foods and ingredients. There's no way for you to know. And you may have several food sensitivities in those bowls. So that's the problem. That's why testing is critical for food sensitivities, and testing and not guessing. So as we go in a little deeper, this one's going to be a little longer. We're probably going to go about 20 minutes. Feel free to like it, share it, ask a question, comment. Got a lot of questions on yesterday's. I know today's is a very interesting topic, one that a lot of people had written in, and I wanted to take some time before I prepared to present on this. The real question is, why do people have more food sensitivities now than they did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? What is going on? Is the American more unhealthy? Do we have more food sensitivities? Well, one, we're testing, true. And two, yes, we do have more food sensitivities. Antigens, foreigners, and anything that passes your body, passes like a barrier, like your gut, that's foreign, they call it antigen. It can be a pathogen, a food protein. So an undigested food protein. By the way, everything needs to be a food protein, and antigenicity is really a critical element to this overarching theme of food sensitivities. So it's an antigen, but how antigenetic or the antigenicity is it of that food issue? How high? How much does your body respond to it? So, for instance, some of the tests that I use, they'll be rated 4 being the top, 4, 3, 2, and I look at 1. So I use a lot of KBMO. I use their food sensitivity, and what you'll see in that food sensitivity, if you're really sensitive, you'll see a 4. Now, a 4-star restaurant, a 4-star movie is good, not on a food sensitivity scale. You're really sensitive, and then, as you drop levels, 4, 3, 2, 1. The highest levels of this antigenicity are gluten and milk proteins. We all know that. Albumin, eggs, casein again, and lectins. Lectins, if you're allergic to them, can really lead you down a path of autoimmunity. Now, the other thing that you're looking at is the immune response. It actually attacks the food protein, but it attacks a branch of the food protein. That branch of the food protein, remember, foods are made like the amino acid chains. So you have your center, and then you have all these different branches. Everybody remember, you could move them around. The branch is called an epitope. So the amino acid sequence for each of the branches, they get changed because you start moving the branch. When you change that amino acid sequence, your body now looks at that protein that has been absorbed before and realizes that it looks like an antigen because the sequence is different. So you're changing the configuration of the branch of the food protein, and that leads you down a path of a food sensitivity. So antigenicity really is increased when the protein changes its configuration. It happens a lot, believe it or not, when it's heated or cooked food. So very few labs will test raw versus heated foods. Heating can change a configuration, kind of like raw eggs. Now, I'm not Rocky. I don't eat raw eggs. I like to cook my eggs every morning. I'm fortunately not allergic to eggs. If you remember, again, my guy Stallone, I mentioned it before, cracking the eggs and drinking them. That's not for me. I much prefer to cook them. What is causing, this was another question that somebody wrote in over the last few days, what is causing these foods to be more antigenetic? And one is a wheat protein. Gluten compounds have been hybridized. They are mixed seeds now. They change the protein sequence. So what you used to have, or what my dad had, or my dad's dad had in gluten and in the soil, isn't what you and I are now getting. And one of the biggest reasons is the added addition of these pesticides. And one of the biggest additions is an herbicide called Roundup, which is glyphosate. The chemical binds to the protein, allowing it to become more antigenetic. So glyphosate, unfortunately, has been shown to be a cancer-causing chemical by the World Health Organization. Gluten, which isn't healthy anyway, we now have what we call dwarf wheat. They make the wheat smaller, so they call it like a dwarf, because the higher the wheat, it would be more farming. So the dwarf wheat poses an issue. They also have native versus original wheats. Not to get too far down that rabbit hole, however, the idea of glyphosate is a chemical, and it holds the gluten on the intestinal tract. So gluten means glue. The glyphosate is in the soil. That soil now, it's not organic, has pesticides. The glyphosate weights it down, and it poses an issue in, obviously, gut health. What's most interesting about it, those pesticides damage and change the protein sequence before you and I get it. So it's already damaged. Even though you use a wash, you clean it at home, you're saying it's not a big difference. It's a big difference. Organic soils, organic foods, there is a boatload of a change from that to what you would consume, non-organic to organic, just like coffee. Coffee, which is a bean, same idea. Any food, we're really looking for organic. Now, it doesn't need the seal if you know the farmer and they're saying they're keeping it organic, they just can't have the seal because of the price. That's a different story. The second thing is deaminated gluten. That's through food processing. So the number one problem you have is all these pesticides, all these herbicides, all these chemicals being used in changing the sequence. Also, food processing. Foods are going through a process. Foods were not made to be processed. Now, I'm defining cooking food as non-processing. Many raw food people will argue with that. But for the context of this conversation, we're going to say if we heat a food, it is not processing the food. But food processing, the deamination of gluten poses a major issue. Food colorings. So it binds to a protein. These colorings bind to different proteins, prevents the protein from getting broken down. The classic example. I happen not to have one today. I wasn't able to go out. Anybody ever have a colored lollipop? Anybody ever have a red lollipop? You put the lollipop in your mouth, you go back and forth a few times, take it out, stick your tongue out, and what do you see? Red. That's food coloring sticking to a protein. That's food coloring sticking to a protein. It is not healthy. So you really want to avoid all the concepts of pesticides, food processing, and food colorings. These are one of the reasons that they're changing the chemical configuration, the protein configuration of our food, leading us down a path of food sensitivities. So a great example would be a food that's hybridized or GMO foods, damaging the protein sequence, going through food processing, changing the configuration, and adding a food coloring. So if you ate a food like that, which would be like a processed food, which would sort of kind of almost be like a Dorito, now you've got the trifecta leading you to the sequela of bad health. So how does the immune system respond to food proteins? It's sort of interesting. Well, there's an increased immune reactivity to these types of food proteins. That increased immune reactivity is what we call that food sensitivity. So I'm not so sure that people would be allergic to as many foods or sensitive to as many foods if we used it in a more whole processed, organic fashion. Probably the biggest problem towards food sensitivities that I've seen is leaky gut. Undigested food particles are able to pass through the gut. Many times I almost talk about leaky gut every week. The gut is semi-permeable. Digested food particles, vitamins, and water are able to pass our gut. That's our essential health barrier. The epicenter of our health is in our gut. And just one little thing everybody knows, I'm a gut to brain guy, so it's gut up, brain down, so you never forget. Or mostly gut up and brain down. Now, getting back to the leaky gut, there's undigested food particles that are supposed to be expelled. They go through this leaky gut. Your immune system attacks them. He sees as an antigen. And when you're having this immune response, you now have elevated inflammation, and you're going to lead yourself down a path of food sensitivities. You got more reactivity to food, and you're unable to combat food inflammation because of this leaky gut. There's also this connection that we never talk about, and this is a Facebook Live all to its own. The immune cells in the gut are communicating with the immune cells in the liver, or the liver is communicating with the immune cells in the gut. That's the enterohepatic circulation. So it circulates through the body. 75% of the toxins communicate between the gut and the liver through the body, and 25% directly communicate through the portal vein. So these macrophages, which are elevated, macrophages can be very attack-oriented because of environmental toxins to the liver. The environment and the environmental toxins which can damage the liver overload the gut, and now you have failing gut health, leading you to food sensitivity. And something called cross-reactivity. Now, the cross-reactivity is interesting in that the cross reactivity is that when you change the configuration of the amino acid in the food, you're now changing like numbers. Those numbers almost in many instances mimic different structures in your body. We call that molecular mimicry. That protein sequence is like a zip code. And when that zip code, so I work in White Plains, everybody can know my zip code, it's 10605. There's 10601 to 10607 in White Plains. The zip codes are very close. When the protein sequence changes, it's changed and it looks like structures, like your thyroid, like your fingers, like different structures. And now you attack yourself and you get what we call cross-reactivity, which leads you down a path of attacking your own innate structures and glands, which is autoimmunity. So these food sensitivities are very prominent. It's what we've done to the soil and how we've processed the food and the colorings that we've added. Those food sensitivities lead you down a path, or can lead you down a path of autoimmunity. I'm a big believer in testing. I try and test all my patients' food sensitivity. KBMO just came out with 172 food tests, doing a great job. It's a little finger stick, little finger blood spot. We get it, we go, we send it, we get it back in a few quick days. If somebody wants the serums, we can do it there, and there are other labs that I use for serums. Food sensitivity for me is a staple in my office because it's really ascertaining one's health and how to manage and modulate one's internal inflammation. Did we get any shout outs or anything? It's been a quiet day. It's Tuesday. No problem. Hopefully everybody found this valuable. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about probiotics and responding to the 60 Minutes probiotics. On Friday we'll have a good friend of mine, a colleague. We'll go live for about 45 minutes with Dr. Dane Donahue, founder of 8 Weeks to Wellness. We're going to talk about lifestyle. So without any further ado, it's been my pleasure. Dr. Rob, always yours in health.